department, and to all other sponsors that helped put this together. I'd like to start my presentation with a poem as an invocation. And my poetry begins with this epigraph by Ntozake Shange, who's an award-winning Black feminist writer. And she calls us to seek and revision God. And she says, we need a God who bleeds now. So here's my original poem titled, A God Who Bleeds. It has a little humor in it, feel free to laugh. You know, you ain't gotta be stiff-necked, okay? I need a God who bled for the first time at her auntie's house. And her aunt called her sister, God's mother, with excitement, bragging, your daughter just got her period at my house of all places. I need a God who bleeds. Bright red, pink, burgundy, or even brownish maroon. I need a God whose cycle synchronizes with the moon, who passes classic size of petals in full bloom. A God who cramps before she turns her Nile to blood. I need a God who bleeds, not from nails in her palms and feet, but from between her thick, thunderous, holy thighs. A God with baby-making hips, who moans in agony as her uterus balls itself into a fist. I need a God who PMSs, craves chocolate, and a ribeye steak during her misses. I need a God who bleeds through her pad and tampon combo, who asks whispering, can you see if I have a sanguine mark on the back of my pants? A God who swings through moods, bloats like nobody's business. A God who cries till kingdom come. I need a God who clutches the heating pad when her womb opens its crimson floodgates. A God who weeps scarlet tears, who bleeds 12 times a year, or even a God whose period is irregular. A God who has been the woman with the issue of blood. I need a God who bleeds free, a free bleeding God whose bed looks like a crime scene in the middle of the night, who forgot to change her sanitary napkin, a God who has to switch out and wash her sheets, a God who keeps the receipts that she bled like mama, sister, auntie, grandma, and great-granny. I need a God who's not ashamed that she had to change her blood-soaked panties. I'd like to start this presentation, after the poem, of course, as an implication, by providing a broader context to my literary lineage and the line from which this poem descends. So this presentation will engage my original poem, A God Who Bleeds, in conversation with Ntozake Shange's call for a God who looks like me, someone who menstruates. Shange penned this feminist call saying, we need a God who bleeds now, a God whose wounds are not some small male vengeance. I am not wounded, I am bleeding to life. We need a God who bleeds now, whose wounds are not the end of anything. Ntozake Shange was a Black American playwright and poet, and as a Black feminist, she wrote about race, gender, womanhood, and Black power. Her renown reverberates through her Obie award-winning play, which I hope you're familiar with, for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, which is a choral poem, an innovative form that she created that mixes poetry, dance, music, and also acting. This author is unique in the fact that she blends theology with poetics. And theologians and poets have long been in dialogue. In her article, Let Us Proclaim the God Who Bleeds Now by Carol P. Christ, feminist historian, scholar, and author, she writes on Shange's bleeding God. To paraphrase, P. Christ writes, Ntozake Shange's God not only bleeds, she bleeds now. Shange's vision of what I call menstrual divinity is not the same as splash on white panties, staining our clothes and sometimes our hearts with shame. No, Shange's God reveals a God who bleeds, and the blood represents the blood of birth and rebirth, the blood of life and the blood of creation. Still, Shange was not the only Black female writer exploring blood, divinity, and incarnation and embodiment. Lucille Clifton explored the same embodiment of bleeding womanhood as a Black female American poet, writer, and educator. From 1979 to 1985, Clifton was the poet laureate of the state of Maryland. And in her poem In Praise of Menstruation, Lucille Clifton connected the blood of life with the cultivation of all creation. And she writes, "If there is a river more beautiful than this, bright as the blood-red edge of the moon, if there is a river more faithful than this, returning each month to the same delta, if there is a river braver than this, coming and coming in a surge of passion, of pain, if there is a river more ancient than this, daughter of Eve, mother of Cain and Abel, if there is in the universe such a river, if there is somewhere water more powerful than this wild water, pray that it flows also through animals, beautiful and faithful and ancient and female and brave." While Shange offered a radical reimagining of the divine as embodied, bleeding, and imperfect, Clifton, on the other hand, burst connection between creation, created creatures, and the creator. Clifton names the sacred flow of feminine life, and together these Black literati invite us to see divine blood not as contamination, but as continuity. And sitting in this continuity of Black luminary lineage, my writing begins where Lucille's imagery and Shange's assertion left off. Now I'd like to share my theo-poetic framing of the womb as holy ground. My theo-poetic work offers an embodied meditation on the womb, menstruation, and incarnate divinity. This creative scholarship challenges long-held theologies, predominantly white male patriarchal theologies, that separate God from bleeding bodies by presenting the womb as a creative space of divine rupture and remembrance, where holy womanhood is baptized in pain without shame. Together, we are reimagining the menstrual body as a theological text, a site of revelation and resistance that white male patriarchal theology has refused to read. Rooted in the memory of my first period at my aunt's house, my poem interweaves personal narrative with womanist theology, Black feminine poetics, and body politics to challenge dominant religious paradigms about bleeding bodies. This presentation brings womanist theology and poetic imagination into conversation, offering a revisioning of God through menstrual metaphor. Next, I want to provide a womanist theological grounding. Building on womanist theologians, we locate the divine within the body, within the embodied and everyday experiences of Black women. Monica Coleman, for example, has a theology of wholeness. Delores Williams has an ethics of survival, and this project turns to menstruation as the sacred soil of revelation. So drawing on Clifton, Shange, Black womanist theological frameworks, I will bear witness to how poetic expression enables a radical uterine imaginary. By centering menstruation, I am naming one of the most stigmatized bodily processes as holy, no less holy than the blood of Christ. Thus, menstruation emerges not simply as a biological process, but as a spiritual act that disrupts sanitized renderings of the divine and reclaims embodied authority, especially among Black women. Now I'd like to pivot to talk about incarnation, which deals with the embodied and divine bleeding. You see, my work says God does not suffer because he bled for us. God suffers because God bleeds with us. I'm going to say that again. God does not suffer because God bled for us. God suffers because he bleeds or she bleeds with us. Incarnation is not just about Jesus' body, but about Mary carrying God's body, her blood, her breath, her womb, all a part of the miracle. A mother's blood is what actually produces the child's tissue and cells through the placenta. And theologically, incarnation begins in a womb with Mary's blood. It is within Mary's womb that Jesus' divinity and humanity are knit together. The woman becomes the vessel of divine visitation. This establishes the womb as a location where divine presence and human flesh meet already holy ground. Before God was born, God was carried in utero. Before God was carried, God was conceived. And before God was conceived, Mary had to have bled. Her blood came from a wound, with a D, wound, in her womb caused by birth. You see, God reveals through this that her blood carried divine DNA. And just like the land, she was called to create, to gestate like all other animals. This connects women's bodies to nature. You see, if we are the holy ground, then our bodies are sacred too. So let's move to look at the womb, the cross, and a predominant contradiction in looking at blood. The poem I read to you, which I'm developing, establishes a theological connection between the womb and Jesus' side, hands, and feet, and the bleeding of the female womb. Christian theology often centers salvation on blood. Jesus' blood shed on the cross as a life-giving redemption. The gospel song by Andre Crouch goes, "The blood that Jesus shed for me, way back on Calvary, the blood that gives me strength from day to day, it will never lose its power. It reaches to the highest mountain and it flows to the lowest valley. The blood that gives me strength from day to day, it will never lose its power." In the church I grew up in, which is the Black church, we sing rejoicing in the blood on Sunday. However, menstruation remains a taboo topic in both religious and secular spaces. According to theologian LaRonda Denise Barnes, many girls grow up entering womanhood under the weight of stigma, taught to see their periods as a curse. In some homes, any trace of menstrual blood, or even the products associated with it, whether used or unused, must be hidden and never discussed. At schools and in workplaces, menstruation is often linked to stereotypes about women being overly emotional, unstable, and weak. And in certain religious communities, menstruating women are still prohibited from serving the sacraments, attending worship, preaching, and serving communion. Women's menstrual blood, while different in context, also testifies to life-giving capacity. Cycles of renewal, shedding the old parts of yourself, and embodying sacrifice. Both can be read as holy disruptions. Blood that the world calls impure or regretful is actually the very sign of God birthing new life. Traditional white male patriarchal theology reveres the blood of Christ, but stigmatizes the blood of women. By holding them side by side, let's expose that contradiction. Why is one blood salvific and the other one silenced? Few scholars have placed the womb and the cross side by side as parallel theologies of blood. but I seek to map that connection. That divine life flows through both the womb and the wound. One is holy and precious, while the other is naturally human but somehow labeled impure. One is saving grace, another is stigmatized suffering. You see, this double standard reveals patriarchal control of sacred narratives. If incarnation required the womb and the crucifixion required the shedding of blood, then menstrual blood is a theological witness, the body's rhythm of life, loss, renewal, and God's own story. Thus, a God who bleeds is not only Jesus on the cross, but also the divine revealed in women's cycles, disruptive, but also life-giving. I now like to trace feminist and womanist continuations and scholarly companions to this work. In Menstrual Blood and the Blood of Christ, Streams of Strength, Vulnerability, and New Life, theologian LaRonda Denise Barnes celebrates women's bodies and reproductive cycles by reimagining menstrual blood as the source of power, transformation, and divine connection. In doing so, she confronts dominant portrayals of menstruation as unclean and unworthy, narratives that have historically excluded women from full participation in the church and society, and have also reinforced the subordination of women, the subordination to men. In her book, Out for Blood, Essays on Menstruation and Resistance, Brianne Foss, professor of women and gender studies at Arizona State University, rethinks the hidden nature of menstruation. Foss argues that menstruation is closeted, leading to bleeding bodies being filled with embarrassment or shame about something natural. Despite menstruation shaping the lives of half the world's population, it has been largely neglected in academic and theological discourse, often dismissed as taboo, trivial, or too intimate for serious inquiry. Yet according to Dr. Foss, menstrual experiences reveal profound truth about embodiment and vulnerability. In this work that I'm presenting to you, I'd like to extend this discourse to divine creativity by drawing on Black womanist theological frameworks through the work of Monica Coleman, Delores Williams, and Cheryl Kirk Dugan. After all, womanist theologians extend this work by grounding faith in the lived realities of Black women's bodies, asserting that God is not distant from their blood, pain, or becoming, but present within them. Delores Williams critiques traditional atonement theology as harmful to Black women. She argues there is nothing divine in the blood of the cross for Black women's experiences of sacrificial suffering. Also, Monica Coleman, writing on Black women's embodied experiences of faith, emphasizes that belief emerges from practice and body, not only abstract doctrine. These discussions support a reading of menstruation not as something marginal or unclean, but as deeply theological and central to encountering God in flesh and in blood. You see, this discourse, charting new territories, invites us to reclaim embodied authority for all women, but especially Black women. And I'd like to conclude with a closing vision of bleeding as a form of divine revelation. In conclusion, I am fusing the Black feminine poetics of Shange and Clifton with a theological inquiry of Williams and others. This is both a poem and a praxis, a way of thinking and being that resists the separation of the theological and the physical. Together, I'm creating a Black-inflected, politically potent poetics and theology to invite a reimagining of the womb. Under this philosophy, the womb becomes a locus of sacred presence, menstrual resistance, and divine possibility. A God who bleeds suggests that to bleed is neither to be broken nor bound, but to be tied to the sacred. By centering the menstrual divinity, both scholarship and poetry reclaim sacred authority for bodies historically deemed unclean, asserting that the bleeding body is not a liability, but a house, a home of revelation, resistance, and transcendence. This reimagining of God asks us to behold not only the body of Jesus, but the bodies that holds Jesus. For half the world are women, and the other half are their sons. Thank you.